Good day, friends. I hope you're doing well. On today's video, we're going to be talking about 5 of our best-selling time-based effects. Let's go. All right, we're back for video number 3 in our series of best-selling pedals. My name is Justin Waterfield. Thank you again for joining me. Today we are talking about time-based pedals, and right here I have 5 pedals pulled from our list of best sellers. These are in no particular order. We're not ranking anything here. We're just talking about what these pedals are, what they do, and how you can use them in a musical context. And then in turn, you will tell us what your favorite is, which ones you like the best. Let us know in the comments below. What we're going to be doing then at the end of all of this is compiling your favorites in a pedal board and getting some sounds out of all these things in combination. So we really need your participation here. Let us know. So before we jump into what these pedals are, let's discuss for a second what time-based effects are. In the previous video, we talked about modulation, and modulation is the changing of something over time. So time-based effects really only deal in the time domain. It extends the notes that you're playing over time without necessarily changing anything. And the way they do this is repeating the note back to you in the case of a delay pedal, or extending it out in sort of an extended cloud, sort of a diffusion of sound like a reverb pedal. All right, having said all that, let's dive into our first pedal, which is over here, the MXR Carbon Copy. This thing is a modern classic. I think pretty much everybody has at least tried one of these, if not owned one of these at one point. It is an all-analog delay circuit. And what does that mean? Why does analog factor into it? Well, back before the days of digital chips and everything, there's a circuit that is built into these sort of older style delays that would generate the repeats that you hear, but they would do it in an sort of impure way, in that it would introduce a lot of signal degradation the more the signal repeats. And it gives it a really sort of rich, dark, kind of grainy tone that really sits back in the mix relative to your dry signal, which is just the direct signal from your instrument. And that just makes it so great for like lead playing, when you don't want the repeats to sort of be up front with your dry signal. If you just want to like pad out your sound and sort of fill things out, when you switch from chords to single notes, sometimes there's like a drop in like the perceived volume or whatever. This will help fill it out. The other cool feature that this thing has is the mod switch. Now this adds modulation onto the wet signal only. So it's a little bit of pitch and a little bit of phase whooshiness going on, but it's very, very subtle. And the idea there is to emulate tape delay. So in the old days, they had tape machines that would do your echoes, but then the tape would age and it would sort of push and pull and it would kind of get worn out, and it would introduce all these sort of subtle variations in the repeats, and that's what this is trying to do. So let's check it out and hear what it sounds like. So before we get started, let's talk for a minute about the signal chain. This is my trusty rusty 58 reissue Les Paul. I got some low output PAF style pickups in here. The amp is a Trainer YCV20. This is a 20 watt EL84 based amp with a Celestion greenback speaker in it. And then we got the pedal in the middle, nice and simple. So let's see what we're dealing with here. We have controls for regen, which is like how many repeats you get, the mix control, which is like a dry-wet mix, and the delay control is how far away the repeats are from the dry signal. So we're going to start with everything at 12 o'clock, right up the middle. We're going to see what it sounds like dry, and then we're going to see what it sounds like wet, and then later on we're going to check out what the mod switch does. So here we go. Here's the dry signal. And here it is with it in. And that, in essence, is delay, is those repeats after the note is played. And you don't hear it so much on sustained chords, especially with a dark analog style delay like this. But if you're sort of playing single notes and you're playing staccato, you'll hear those repeats a lot more defined. So let's twist some knobs and see what other kind of tones we can get. That right there, that setting right there is really cool and really reminiscent of like tape delay, and in terms of like the slapback, like you'd hear from like Scotty Moore or any of those early sort of 50s guitar players like Vince Gallup and all them. Just very quick, like you're in a tiled bathroom or something. So let's crank up the delay a little bit. And let's hear what this mod switch is going to do. And without. So it's very, very subtle, but it's only on the wet signal. So let's try something here. Let's go all the way wet. There we go. And let's put in a lot of regen and let's kick that on. So there, it's way more obvious. You can hear that the repeats are just slowly and subtly getting swept by this very lush sounding chorus. Very, very cool pedal. Check it out. Moving right along, we have another delay here. This is the Boss DD3T digital delay. So what is the difference between analog delay and digital delay? Fairly simple. Like I explained with the carbon copy, there's an analog circuit consisting of all sorts of capacitors and timing chips and everything that basically create copies of your signal, but in doing so with those kind of components, there's a lot of signal degradation. It's very warm, it's very grainy. They're not sort of true repeats in the sense that it's like copying your signal and repeating it out. Digital delay is exactly that. It's a digital recorder. It's almost like a precursor to the loop pedals that we have now, in that it's taking snapshots of whatever you're playing and it's just repeating it back verbatim. There's no signal degradation or very little of it. And it's way more upfront. It can be way more rhythmic in that sense. So in terms of like adding adding a rhythmic element to your playing, or filling in notes that sound like they're there but you're not actually picking them, digital delay is a great way to go for that. Now, in terms of this one here, the DD3 has been in production in some form or another for decades. This was actually one of Boss's first compact digital delay pedals, and one of the first pedals of its kind, period. Before then, digital delays were relegated to those rack units in studios. The DD3T is the first time we're seeing a tap tempo feature on basically what's sort of the most basic and the most entry-level digital delay pedal from Boss. So what this lets you do is it lets you hook up something like a Boss FS5U or like the Ernie Ball tap switch or something like that, and you can tap in a rhythm with your foot, and the internal clock will synchronize to that, and that's very useful for playing with drummers who may be slipping in and out of perfect time. You can sort of adjust the tempo of your pedal accordingly. So let's give it a listen and see what this thing sounds like. So let's take a look at these controls before we get started. There's the level control, which is self-explanatory. It's the level of the repeats relative to the dry signal. We have the feedback, which is how many repeats you get. And then we have the time control, which is the distance between the repeats. So very similar to what we saw on the carbon copy. Then we get this fourth knob here, which is the mode switch. This gets you into the sort of small, medium, and long delay times. And why they split it up like this is it just narrows down the range on the time knob. If you try to fit all of this, the entire scope of this maximum delay time into one knob, it can be hard to dial it in exactly how you like. So let's set everything in high noon and see what it sounds like. Okay, perfect example of what I was talking about. It's a direct copy of my signal, just repeated and repeated and repeated, and then it fades away, but the signal fidelity is there. You get all the brightness and all the punch of the original signal just repeated back to you in perfect digital clarity. And so what I was doing there, kind of like a U2 kind of Streets Have No Name kind of thing, that the delay itself was filling in all these notes that I wasn't actually playing. Which gives a very rhythmic feel. Now let's twist some knobs and see what else we can do. I should also say that the mode knob influences the shortest delay time as well as the longest delay time that you can get out of this time knob. So right now we're on the longest setting, which is a maximum, I believe, of 800 milliseconds, so almost a full second. Let's bump it down to the shortest one and see what the range is. So very robotic, very mechanical sounding because the repeats are coming so close after the dry note. It just kind of sounds like you're in the shower. So let's reset everything to midway, and let's go on the medium setting. So here we're starting to hear a little bit of that slapback. And just for fun, let's go back on the long setting, set feedback pretty high, see what we get. Okay, great example of the kind of signal fidelity that you get there. So just one chord, boom, just repeated and repeated and repeated. No degradation, no funny business, just nice, clean repeats. That's digital delay. All right, guys, just want to give you a reminder to vote for your favorite pedals in this video. Do so in the comments below. What we're doing is we're going to build a pedal board at the end of this series, put all your favorites together, and we're going to see what tones we can get out of these things in combination with each other. So be sure to let us know which ones you like. Now, shifting gears a little bit, we're going to talk about reverb. What is reverb? It's different from delay. Delay is echoes, right? Like if you yell into the Grand Canyon, you hear your voice coming back at you. What reverb does, it's sort of a soft diffusion of sound. It's like when you're talking in a big cathedral, your voice doesn't necessarily slap back at you or repeat and echo off the walls. It can just sort of like trail off into this beautiful kind of cloud of sound, and that's what reverb is. And here we have the Oceans 11 reverb from Electro Harmonics. This is a similar pedal to what we looked at in the modulation video with the Mod 11, in that it's a sort of reverb factory. It has all these different algorithms and different models of reverb built into it with the setting switch. And a lot of those settings have alternate modes with this mode switch. So if you really want to get into dialing in your ideal reverb tone and playing with all sorts of like cool settings and just sort of not having to deal with menus and letting your ears guide you, this is a very, very cool option. Now we have settings for hall and spring and reverse echo, which is pretty cool. That's not terribly common, but a very, very cool effect. We have tremolo reverb, which is bizarre. We have modulated reverb. We have, of course, the very popular shimmer reverb. This thing has pretty much one of everything. The other cool thing that it does is it has this tone control, and this is kind of a filter in that depending on the setting you're on, you can set how bright or how dark you want the reverb. And this is a great feature to have when you're dealing with time-based effects, because it lets you govern where the effect sits in relation to your dry signal, especially for something like reverb, which it can conceivably go on and on and on, give you a massive sense of space. The last thing you want that to be doing necessarily is clouding whatever you're playing. Or maybe you do, but that's the point of the tone control, is it gives you that option. Let's strap on the guitar and see what it sounds like. So first, let's talk about the other two controls that we have here. We have effects level, which is the level of the reverb relative to the dry signal. And then we have the time control, which is how long you want the sound of the reverb to extend, or in other words, how far into space you want to go. And then, of course, the tone knob, which we already talked about. So let's start things off real simple on the Hall algorithm and see what we get. Very, very nice. Just spreads out those chords. Sounds really lush and lovely. So while we're on this nice simple setting, let's tweak some knobs here. So that's a lot of sustain, and that's what we're talking about in terms of like time-based effects, the way they extend your notes out over time without really changing anything. Let's keep going here. Pretty cool stuff. You got to check this one out. There's a lot more under the hood here that I didn't get to. Head down to your local Long McQuade and try that one out for yourself. All right, so we're still on the topic of reverb, and now we have the big daddy. This is the Strymon Big Sky. This thing is a reverb factory. If you have any interest in going all in on reverbs, this is the one to get. This has everything under the sun, and it's laid out in a really nice way that it gives you easy access to all the parameters to dial things in exactly how you want. So let's take a look at what we got going on here. We have the type knob, which lets you select the algorithm that you want to use. Now the algorithm is basically just the setting. So you have room, hall, plate, spring. You have non-linear, you have the magneto setting, which is a multi-tap delay with reverb, which is bonkers. You have the shimmer settings to get your Daniel Lanois kind of effects on. You got the choral setting, which is my personal favorite. Really just a massive amount of presets here that you can then go and edit to your taste. Over here, you have the actual controls. So you have the tone, which is how bright or how dark the reverb sounds. We have the mod control over here, which affects how the modulation is going to affect, or how much of the modulation affects the wet signal. We have the mix control, which goes between the dry signal and the wet signal, lets you balance that. We have the decay, which is how long the reverb lasts, how long the decay lasts. We have the parameter 1 and parameter 2, which are specific to the algorithm that you choose. So these will be extra functions that will change depending on what setting you're on. Then we have this knob called pre-delay. Now, I want to stop here and talk about pre-delay for a second because this is very misunderstood. Pre-delay is a way to distance the dry signal from the onset of the reverb. So this is very useful if you don't necessarily want your sound washed out by the reverb and you're sort of competing against this cloud of sound that's building up behind whatever you're playing. The pre-delay will delay the reverb just a bit for the listener to hear the note that you're playing, and then there are the trails. So it's a good way to sort of recapture a lot of the definition in your playing and not just have everything wash out. I mean, you may want that, but that's the point of the knob, to give you the control over that. So let me strap on the guitar and take you through some of my favorite settings. All right, so instead of taking you through like how to build a sound from scratch, let's just go through and play some of these presets, because these guys at Strymon, they got good ears, man. Like their presets are spot on, which is not always the case with presets. Sometimes you got to finesse them a bit. These are great right out of the box. So we have 3 foot switches here, which are 3 different presets. So let's just see what the factory has set up for us. Do you know what I mean? It's perfect the way it is. You really don't need to change anything. All right, let's see what foot switch B has for us. That's my favorite setting right there, the choral setting. So again, we're not talking about choral as in like the Great Barrier Reef choral. We're talking about a chorus, and you almost get the impression of like, you know, like choir singers in a giant cathedral or something like that. It's really, really lovely. Let's see what's on option C. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the shimmer setting. This is like, it's perfect in every way. And what I did there is I rolled down my tone control on, flipped to the neck pickup, rolled down the tone control. So took the bite out of it, and then I put the mix all the way wet, and it just turned into a synthesizer playing lovely pads. This is the power of this thing. This is a reverb pedal that can make you sound like whatever. It's truly, truly lovely. Do not be intimidated by this. You have to try this one out. All right, we're almost done, friends. The last one on the menu is the Fender Tre-Verb. Now, this is a bit of a cheeky choice. It's a reverb pedal that has tremolo in it. And when I first heard about this pedal, I was like, why? Why would you put a time-based effect with a amplitude modulation effect that like will cut off your sound and this and that? Like, tremolo does. And I had to have somebody explain it to me that this is what Fender amps do, right? They have reverb and tremolo built in. And I was like, oh, okay, so this kind of can conceivably turn your amp into something Fender-esque. But what this pedal does is a lot more than that. And I'm going to explain it to you. So each side of the pedal has 3 knobs and 2 switches. The switches govern the algorithm. So again, the settings, the models of the reverb and the models of the tremolo. And each one is independently foot switchable. On the reverb side, which is the side we're going to be focusing on, we have the switch which has 3 settings, which is 63, so that's the 1963 reverb tank as used by like Dick Dale and all of those surf guys. We have the 65 setting, which is the built-in reverb that comes in all blackface and silverface amps. And then we have a plain old plate reverb, which, sounds great as well. We have the tone control, we have the dwell control, which is kind of like the time control, like how long we want the reverb to last, and then a wet-dry blend. On the tremolo side, we have the switch labeled Opto, Bias, and HM. Now, we already did a video on the modulation pedal, so I'm not going to spend too much time here. Hope you all watched that video. But I'm going to run it down for you real quick. The Opto setting is like you would find on a blackface or silverface amp. This is it's got a bit of a harder chop to it. It's a square wave oscillator, so it's on and off, on and off, on and off. We have the bias tremolo, which is more like the earlier Fender amps where it was switching the output tubes on and off. So it's got more of a gentle ramp up and ramp down, so more like a sine wave oscillator. Then we have HM. This is harmonic tremolo. The intricacies of this are a little bit beyond the scope of this video, but suffice it to say it's moving different frequency ranges at different rates, and that gives the tremolo a little bit of a phasing effect. It sounds very sparkly, almost like a univibe or like a rotary or something like that. It's pretty cool and kind of hard to find in a lot of pedals. And the controls on here are just level, rate, and depth. And like I said, these 2 halves of the pedal are totally independent of each other. You can switch one on without the other, and that's great. But there's also a switch on the back that lets you pick the order of the effects. You can have the reverb go into the tremolo, or you can have the tremolo go into the reverb. Again, giving you access to sort of all these classic Fender sounds from the blonde era to the brown face era to the black face to the silver face era. It's all here depending on how you configure this. So let's give it a go. All right, like I said, guys, I'm going to be spending most of the time talking about the reverb side of things. Let's start out on the 63 setting, knobs at high noon, see what we get. Can you tell that's my favorite setting? The 63 is just so big and splashy and it's just rude. So the thinking is that the 63 reverb tank was an external reverb unit that you would plug your guitar into, and then you would plug the output of the reverb unit into the input of your amp. So if you had your amp really hot and really cooking, it would be sort of overdriving the sound of the reverb, and that's very much what we have here, just something big and rude and splashy. It's not discreet at all. It lets you know that it's there, but that's what's so cool about it. Now, let's switch over to the 65 setting and see what we get. Much better behaved, right? This is emulating the reverb circuit that's built into the Fender amps, but it's positioned later in the circuit after any preamp drive or any tone shaping you do. So it's basically just giving whatever you're giving to it, it's just adding a tail onto it, and there you go. Now let's see what the plate sounds like. So that's probably the most polite and least colored of all the reverbs on here. It's nice, but I would say if you're going to buy this pedal, 63 or the 65, those are the settings to use. And real quick, let's hear what this harmonic tremolo is all about. Very, very cool pedal. This is seriously underrated. Do not sleep on this one, guys. This is absolutely worth a try. Guys, thank you so much for joining me on this video. I had an absolute blast. Reverb is one of my personal favorites. I hope it's one of your favorites too. And speaking of favorites, let us know what was the one you liked the best in the comments below. Again, the point of doing this three-part series was to give you guys a taste of obviously what's out there, but also so that you guys can tell us what pedals you like the best. Because what we're going to do is we're going to assemble the ones that are most highly voted onto a pedal board, and we're going to play with them, and we're going to see what kind of tones we can get out of them. And we'll add in some other surprises from our best sellers list as well. The links to all the products are in the description below. Make sure you like and subscribe, and stay tuned for the final 4th episode in the series. We'll see you then.